Hello guys. Good morning. Have a cup of tea. Please let me know if hopefully this is correct. Please let me know how the audio is on the music side, if it's too loud. When I'm reading, I would like it to be kind of soft, like barely audible kind of thing, but you can still make it out. So just let me know how that sounds in comparison with my voice, if it needs to be more or less. I think the follow goal is right. I don't know, something like that. I hope you're all having a good morning, or if you're watching this later, I hope you're having a good day. So I was able to pull out my Nancy Drew books, and yeah, I think this looks right. I was able to pull out my Nancy Drew books, and I think I found most of them. There may be a couple missing that are just randomly happen to get in some other boxes. But I just figured the one that the next one in the series that I haven't read yet, personally, is number 8. And I'm slowly trying to make my way through the series of whatever the books that I have. I do technically have all the books in the main original Yellowbacks, but my stepmom has them because she bought them for me and she found them at a really good deal. So she'll probably bring them next weekend, actually. Not this weekend, but the weekend after. So then I'll have all the books. And we can maybe backtrack a little bit, because I'm trying to read all of them eventually, you know. But that's a very momentous task. So today we have number 8, Nancy's Mysterious Letter. And if you can see in the book description, that's not the entire description because it was rather long and, you know, the bot didn't want me to put that many characters in there. I need to warm up my throat. So I'll read you the full description if I can stop coughing. Okay, by mistake, Nancy Drew receives a letter from England intended for an heiress also named Nancy Drew. When Nancy undertakes a search for the missing young woman, it becomes obvious that a ruthless, dangerous man is determined to prevent her from finding the heiress or himself. Clues that Nancy unearths lead her to believe that the villainous Edgar Nixon plans to marry the heiress and then steal her inheritance. During her investigation, Nancy discovers that Nixon is engaged in a racket that involves many innocent, trusting persons. The thrilling hunt for Nixon and the heiress takes Nancy in and out of many perilous situations. How the teenage detective saves the British heiress from the sly, cunning schemer makes a highly intriguing story of mystery and suspense. So that's the full description. And the first picture we have in here, it says Ned pulled Nancy down to the pavement. Ooh, Ned is involved in this book. So hard to get that perfectly straight. So there's the first picture of Nancy's Mysterious Letter. Originally published in 1932, redone in 68. I feel like that's late. I don't know. Anyways, I guess I'll start chapter 1. Let me make sure. I don't know that I announced on Discord that I was live. So I need to make sure People know I'm live. And for some reason my Discord is set to be showing that I'm streaming, but it's not. So I don't know what's up with that. It's kind of weird. Streamer mode. Why is it disabled? That's weird. There we go. I don't know why it got turned off. Make sure... Yep. Okay. Alright, we're good to go. Alright. Oh! Sorry, I have a plate on the desk. Alright, it's time to start Nancy's Mysterious Letter, Chapter 1, Stolen Letters. I hope that's not too loud. Okay. Alright. Oh, poor Ira, Nancy Drew exclaimed and slowed her convertible. The two girls with her turned to look toward the sidewalk. Trudging along was an elderly mail carrier. He was lugging a heavy bag over one shoulder. His head was down, and his eyes were almost closed against the strong November wind that swirled leaves and dirt around him. "Mr. Nixon," Nancy called out of her open window, "let me give you a ride." The mail carrier looked up and managed to smile. "Hello, Nancy," he said. "Thank you, but I have to stop at every house. Lots of letters today. There's one in the bottom of my bag for you. It was sent airmail from London, England." "How exciting," Nancy said. "Well, I'll see you at the house." She added, "I'll have some hot cocoa waiting for you." Nobody does this. Does anybody actually know their mail carrier by name now? Mr. Nixon smiled and Nancy drove on. "I don't know anyone in London," she said to her friends. "Who could be writing to me?" The attractive Titian blonde, blue-eyed girl at once became lost in thought. "Another mystery, probably," remarked her dark-haired companion, George Fane. George was an attractive, slender girl who kept her hair short and always wore tailored clothes. Her cousin, seated next to her, was blonde and slightly overweight. When Bess Marvin grinned, her deep dimples showed prominently. "Maybe you have an unknown admirer in England, Nancy," she said. George gave Bess a dark look. "Do you always have to think of the romantic side of things?" Bess tossed her head. "What's more fun?" she retorted. The three girls were returning from an overnight visit to Redgate Farm, where at one time Nancy, with the help of her two friends, had captured a counterfeiting gang. The solving of that mystery had been followed by Nancy's tracking down. The solving of that mystery had been followed by Nancy's tracking down the clue in the diary. The trunk of Nancy's convertible was filled with fruits and vegetables from the farm. When she reached the rear of her home, the Drews' housekeeper, Mrs. Hannah Gruen, opened the door and rushed down the steps. "Nancy, you're home!" she cried out and gave the girl a hug. "Hello, Bess. Hello, George." As Nancy unlocked the trunk of her car, she said, "We met Ira Nixon down the street. He's bringing another mystery." She told the housekeeper about the letter from England. "Poor Ira is half frozen. I promised him some hot cocoa when he gets here." "I'll go right in and make it," said Mrs. Gruen. "You girls unload the car." "My, what a lot of stuff! And it smells wonderful!" Nancy and her friends had just finished putting the farm products into the Drews' cold cellar when the front doorbell rang. Nancy hastened to answer it. Mr. Nixon stood there. As he set his mailbag down in the vestibule, Nancy thought, "He looks so exhausted. I hope he can finish out the year until his January retirement." She led the way into the living room. Nancy, although eager to see her mail, resisted the temptation to ask for it. She would wait until he was ready to give it to her. A few moments later, Bess came in carrying a tray with 4 cups of cocoa. Behind her was George with a big plate of homemade cookies. That sounds really good. Hannah Gruen, who had lived with Nancy and her father since the death of the girl's mother when she was 3 years old, was an excellent cook. She enjoyed baking and often surprised the family with delicious cakes and pies. Well, isn't she lucky? Ira Nixon sipped his cocoa slowly. He nibbled on a cookie, and slowly color came into his thin face. Hannah Gruen walked in with a pot of cocoa and refilled everyone's cup. As the mail carrier finished the second cup of cocoa, he said he must be on his way. "I almost forgot to give you your letter," Mr. Nixon said as he stood up and went directly to the vestibule. A moment later, the girls heard him cry out and rushed to his side. "What's the matter?" Nancy asked. "The letters, they're gone." "What do you mean?" George asked, peering into the bag. There was nothing in it but magazines. "All the letters still to be delivered have been stolen," Ira Nixon exclaimed. He began to sway, and the girls quickly grabbed hold of him. They led him back to the living room sofa. Oh dear, he moaned. "Only 6 more weeks to my retirement, and now this disgrace." Bess tried to soothe him. "But it wasn't your fault." "It's a rule that the mail carrier must keep his bag with him at all times," the man said. Suddenly George turned to Nancy. "Your letter from England. Now you'll never know who sent it." And here's the picture on this page. It says, "All the letters have been stolen," the mailman exclaimed. "And that's not the worst of it," Ira Nixon spoke up. "I also had a registered letter from Mr. Drew. There may have been an important document in it." The girls and Hannah Gruen looked at one another. Almost instantly, Nancy sprang into action. "The thief can't be far away," she said. "We must try to catch him." The 3 girls put on their coats and dashed out the front door. The Drew home stood well back from the street and was reached by a curving driveway. "You girls go left," Nancy suggested. "I'll go to the right." They ran to the street and looked in all directions. Bess and George, seeing no one, hurried to the corner. Then George went left and Bess right. In the meantime, Nancy had spotted little Tommy Johnson, who was riding his tricycle on the sidewalk. She hurried to talk to him. "Hi, Nancy," he called out. "I just made a new record. Want to see how fast I can go?" "Some other time, Tommy," she answered. "Tell me, have you been riding past our house?" "Sure thing." "Did you see anybody come from there in the past few minutes?" Nancy asked the 5-year-old. "Yep, a man." "What did he look like?" Tommy thought for a moment. "Well, he was real thin, and he was taller than you, and he was in an awful hurry." "What was he wearing?" Nancy prodded. Tommy giggled. "A yellow coat and a hat." Nancy was puzzled. "You mean a yellow raincoat and rain hat?" "Nope, it was a winter coat and hat like my daddy wears." "And it was yellow?" Nancy asked. Tommy nodded. Then he grinned. "Nancy, while I was racing, I was playing detective, like you. I can tell you something else." Nancy stooped down so that she was on eye level with Tommy. "Tell me everything," she pleaded. "Will you give me a detective's badge if I do?" he asked. "I sure will," Nancy promised. "Now, tell me quickly what else you can about the man in the yellow coat." "I can't tell you anything else about him, but I know something about his car." "Oh, he was in a car?" "He sure was," Tommy replied, and began to laugh. "It was a beat-up old thing. I guess he's pretty poor." "What color was the car?" Nancy asked. "Same as his coat." Tommy paused and then said, his eyes twinkling, "You know what? I remember some of his license plate. The first part was TJ, just like my name." Nancy asked excitedly, "Do you remember the number?" "Not all of it. It was too long. But the first 2 numbers were 1, 2. "Oh, Tommy, you've been a wonderful help to me," Nancy said, giving the little boy a hug. "One more question. Did you see the man carrying anything in his hand?" "Yep, he had a lot of letters, and he was stuffing them into his pockets." Nancy realized that the suspect by this time was too far away for her to find, but she was excited by the excellent clues the little boy had given her. She thanked him and returned home. At the front door, she met Bess and George. Her friends reported that they had had no luck. Nancy told them what she had learned. As soon as they entered the house, she hurried to the living room. Ira Nixon sat slumped in the corner of the sofa, but when he saw the girls, he looked up hopefully. "Did you find anything out about the letters?" he asked. "I didn't find the thief," Nancy answered, "but I did pick up an excellent clue. Mr. Nixon, do you know a tall, slender man who wears a yellow overcoat and hat and has a beat-up car with the license plate TJ12? I don't know the rest of the numbers." To the surprise of Hannah Gruen and the girls, Ira Nixon uttered a cry of dismay. The blood drained from his face. He put his hands over his cheeks and exclaimed, No, it couldn't be. Oh, what will I do?" Ira Nixon slumped forward in a faint. That was the end of chapter 1. And I have nothing to catch up on. And I'm assuming my chat is working. I don't know why my voice is so grovelly. I don't know. It's probably fine, but I'm going to restart my chat just in case. It's weird to watch myself. Okay. What? Oh, thank you for the host, Summer. Maybe it wasn't working. That's weird. Okay. I don't know. I'm not even sure that, Summer is here, but thank you for the host, nonetheless. Just making sure. Oh, hi, Summer. Good to see you. How are you? I just finished chapter 1. You didn't miss much. There was a mailman who lost some letters, basically. And there's a thief stealing letters. And I have an important email, so I'm going to look at that real quick. But how are you doing, Summer? Good to see you. Thank you for being here. Okay. Just trying to see here. I have rehearsal. You're doing good. That's good. I'm doing alright. Things are just like more busy than usual, and it's kind of ridiculous. Just got back home from surgery, so I'm going to likely go to sleep immediately, but just wanted to let you know it went well. Oh, okay. Good. I'm glad to hear that, Sarah. I was going to text you, but I didn't know, if your surgery was early or later, but yeah, good to see you, and I'm glad it went well. And yeah, please go to sleep. Please rest your body. I'm sure you're exhausted, so okay. I just need to remember to put that on the calendar. It's a rehearsal. 7 a.m. Okay. Yeah, I feel like most surgeries are usually really early, but you never know. So, I meant to text you last night, but it got away from me because I was at ballet and I got back late and I figured you were asleep. So, ooh. Okay. Yeah, I'm doing alright, Summer. Things are just kind of busy because of Nutcracker stuff, and this week is just busy. It's my mother-in-law's birthday, or it was yesterday, but we're doing stuff tonight because I had ballet last night. And then Friday, we may be going to see Rocky Horror Picture Show, which we've never done before, and that should be fun. No worries, okay. Yeah, have a good night. Well, sleep well. Okay, without further ado, let's start chapter 2. The Vanished Money. Okay. When the mail carrier did not respond... Oh, Summer. Question, sorry. How does the music sound compared to my voice? Is it pretty low? Should it be up anymore? Let me know what you think. Okay. When the mail carrier did not respond to first aid treatment by Hannah Gruen and the girls, the housekeeper insisted they call a doctor. I'll telephone Dr. Amundsen up the street, Nancy offered. He was not the Drews' physician, but she was sure that in this emergency he would come. The line was busy and continued to be so. George became nervously impatient. Oh, why bother? I can run up there just as fast. She grabbed her coat and went out the door. While Mrs. Gruen continued to administer first aid to the unconscious mail carrier, she told Nancy and Bess more about him. Yeah, that's a great time to just stop and have a conversation. Ira Nixon was a bachelor and lived in a small house on the other side of River Heights. It had belonged to his mother, who had survived 2 husbands. When she died, it was learned she had willed the property and a small amount of money to Ira. But now a half-brother, 30 years younger, was demanding 50% of the money. So far, Ira had refused because the inheritance had actually belonged to Ira's father, and the mother had kept it all these years for his son. Ira told me his half-brother Edgar has been very nasty lately, and has even threatened to go to court to upset the will. It could go a little... Okay. Okay, let me know about that. Thank you, Summer. Okay. Poor Mr. Nixon, Bess said softly. The housekeeper went on to say that Edgar had become very obnoxious and had almost succeeded in intimidating Ira. She sighed. Probably Ira won't be able to hold out much longer. He's too old and weak to resist. Where does this half-brother live? Nancy asked. Ira doesn't know. Edgar never would tell him. And also, he would never tell him what business he was in. Only yesterday, when Ira came here with mail, he told me that Edgar had been to see him the night before and became furious when Ira would not give him any money. He called him all sorts of dreadful names and finally said, I'll make you suffer for this. I'll ruin you. Hannah's last statement gave Nancy an idea. Do you suppose the person who stole the mail could have been Edgar Nixon? She asked. I'll bet it was, Bess replied. When you described him to Ira, the poor old man recognized who he was, and that's why he fainted. Edgar must be an absolutely despicable person. The others agreed. Their conversation was cut short by the arrival of George with the doctor. The girls went to the kitchen during the examination that followed, but Hannah Gruen remained with Ira. Nancy said she should notify the police and the postal inspector about the theft. And I'd better call Dad, too. When her friend, Police Chief McGinnis, came on the wire, she gave him the story. We'll put out an alarm for the man in the yellow coat, he told her. Nancy next called the River Heights post office. The postal inspector was not in, but an investigative aide took the message and said he would pass the word along. Nancy's third call was to her father's office. Mr. Drew was a prominent attorney, and his daughter always felt flattered when he asked her opinion on or advice on a case where a mystery was involved. In a few minutes, Mr. Drew's secretary put the attorney on the line. Dad, we've had some real excitement at the house this morning, she said, and proceeded to tell him what had happened. Ira Nixon hasn't regained consciousness yet. The doctor is here now. Well, you are full of news, Mr. Drew said. Keep me informed on what's happening. Now, about this registered letter, I'm afraid it may have contained a large sum of money. Nancy was horrified. Did the thief know this, and was it the reason he had waited for a chance to steal the mail? Where was the letter from? She asked. Isn't it unusual for people to send money through the mail nowadays? Indeed it is, and a very bad thing to do, the lawyer replied. I suspect that this registered letter may have come from a client of mine, Mrs. Quigley. I take care of most of her affairs, and she sends me money every so often. I've told her repeatedly to mail me only checks, but I have a hunch that she has ignored my advice again. Does she always send her letters to the house? Nancy asked. Usually, Mr. Drew answered. I'll call her at once and find out if... Hold the line a moment, Nancy. She waited several seconds. Then her father came back on the line. My secretary has just buzzed me to say that Mrs. Quigley is in the outer office. I'll talk to her and call you back. While waiting, Nancy told Bess and George about the client who insisted upon sending large sums of money through the mail. It was not long before Mr. Drew called back. Hello, Nancy? What I feared is true. Mrs. Quigley feels very bad about the whole thing. We are sure it was her letter that was stolen. Oh, Dad, this makes an embarrassing situation for you, doesn't it? Nancy queried. Yes, it does, her father replied. Having my client's money stolen from my house. Then he added, how's Ira Nixon? Nancy put down the phone and hurried toward the living room, calling out, Mrs. Gruen, my father is on the line. He wants to know how Mr. Nixon is. He's coming around, the housekeeper answered. The doctor says he'll have to go to the hospital, though, for a complete checkup. He just fainted. Nancy ran back to the kitchen and reported this to her father. He sighed in relief. I'm glad the poor old man is regaining consciousness, he said. Well, I must talk to Mrs. Quigley now. See you at dinner. Mrs. Gruen came to tell the girls that they might return to the living room. Dr. Amundsen explained that he must get back to his office immediately to see a number of patients who were waiting. Mrs. Gruen has kindly offered to get in touch with Mr. Nixon's regular doctor, he said. She will ask him to make arrangements for an ambulance to come from River Heights Hospital and take Mr. Nixon there. He's recovering nicely, but he shouldn't go home yet. Ira's physician promised to be at the hospital by the time his patient reached there. The ambulance would arrive at the Drew home in about 20 minutes. Nancy was eager to ask the carrier some questions, but realized he was in no condition to discuss his brother, especially one who was so mean to him, she thought. Ira Nixon himself brought up the subject of the missing letters. I feel better now. Guess that doctor shot put new life into me. Sorry I can't tell you where your father's registered letter came from. I didn't notice. Nancy asked gently, Did you by any chance see the return address on the envelope to me? Ira Nixon closed his eyes, and his brow furrowed as he tried to remember. Finally, he said, Seems to me your letter was not from one person. It was more like 3 names. A business firm, Nancy suggested. Again, the mail carrier tried hard to remember. Finally, he shook his head. It's not much hope, I guess. My head's getting too old to remember things very long. But I seem to recall the first word in the name. It was... Nancy and the others waited expectantly. They could see Ira Nixon's lips move, as if he was murmuring several names before saying one aloud. Finally, a faint smile spread over his face. I remember now, he said. Clear as a bell. The first word was Malmesbury. That's a wonderful help, Nancy told him. But she was thinking there probably were a lot of Malmesburys in London, or its vicinity. It would take her a long time to find out who the sender of her mysterious letter was. Just then, the ambulance arrived, and 2 interns came into the house with a stretcher. Ira Nixon brushed the stretcher aside. Long as I got 2 good legs, I'm going to walk, he insisted. I'm sorry, sir, one of the interns said, but it's a hospital rule. The letter carrier frowned. You mean it's a law? I've got to ride on that thing? What'll people think? The other smiled. The interns helped Ira Nixon onto the stretcher and carried him to the ambulance. We'll follow in my car, said Nancy. She hurried to her car and the 3 girls hopped in. As soon as Ira Nixon was comfortably settled in the hospital, the girls said goodbye and left. Nancy first took George, then Bess to their homes. What a morning, Bess remarked as she waved goodbye. Keep us informed on what happens. I will, Nancy promised. She had been in her own house only long enough to say to Hannah, "What's for lunch?" when once again the front doorbell rang. Nancy went to answer it. A young man stood there. He introduced himself as Mr. Horace Moore, an investigative aide to the River Heights postal inspector. "Are you Nancy Drew?" he asked gruffly. "Yes, I am." The young man stared at her hard. Then he said, "Young lady, you've broken the law. You're in trouble with the authorities." End of chapter 2. Is the music still okay? It's at a good level. It looks a little high now, but I can't tell. Also, I should make sure that it's, yeah, it's good for now. Excellent chapter 2 reading, thank you. Oh, the music is still good. Okay, awesome. Thank you, Summer. Okay, well, we will continue on with chapter 3. I don't know how long I'm going to go, but until I feel like stopping, I guess. Okay. Chapter 3, A Baffling Note. Mr. Moore's accusation left Nancy speechless for a few seconds. Finally, she asked him how she had broken the law. The young man looked at her superciliously. She judged that he was not very many years older than she, and his attitude annoyed her. But out of respect for his position, she said nothing. "Miss Drew," he began, "you may not be aware of this, but it is against the law to invite mail carriers into your home while they are on duty." "What? What? Is this real?" "I see," Nancy replied, "but don't you think this case was an exception? Poor Ira Nixon had been battling the wind for a long time, and he was exhausted. Anyway, he didn't bring his mailbag inside our house. He left it in this vestibule where you are standing." "That's even worse," the aide told her. "Our carriers know the rule. They must keep their bags with them at all times, but this doesn't excuse you." "Perhaps not," said Nancy. "I shall take the matter up with my father, and he will come to your office." Moore was not to be dismissed so easily. In a pompous manner, he asked, "What does your father have to do with this?" Nancy looked him straight in the eye. "The law says that when anyone is accused of a crime, he may consult his lawyer. My father is a lawyer." Right? Her color blinked. I suppose you're right. When the inspector returns, I shall pass the information along to him." Nancy did not comment on this. She knew that the postal inspector was a very reasonable man. Surely he would understand that the case of Ira Nixon was indeed an exception. "Are you aware," she asked Moore, "that Ira Nixon is in the hospital?" "I heard something of the sort, but this doesn't excuse him." "And now, if you'll excuse me," Nancy said, starting to close the door. With a mumbled reply, the officious young man turned and left the house. Mr. Drew came home early, explaining that he was so curious about what had taken place during the day, he wanted to get more details from Nancy at once. She smiled. The whole thing gets more mysterious every minute. Listen to this." She told him about the investigative aide from the post office. When she finished, Mr. Drew burst into laughter. "My congratulations to you on telling him you would turn the case over to your lawyer." Then he sobered. "You are not to blame, Nancy, for the stolen letters. I'm sure Postal Inspector Warnick will agree with us." Nancy asked him how his client, Mrs. Quigley, had taken the loss of her money. Was she very upset? "She certainly was," the lawyer replied. "My secretary had to bring smelling salts and a cup of black coffee." Finally, Mrs. Quigley began to cry and admitted that she should have followed my advice and sent a check. Father and daughter talked a long time about the whole affair. Their conversation was interrupted by a phone call from Mr. Drew. He came back from answering it to tell Nancy an emergency had arisen. "I must go at once to see a client. He has been in a bad accident. I probably won't be home until late, so don't wait up for me, Nancy." She and Hannah Gruen ate alone. To cheer up Nancy, the housekeeper suggested that they go to a movie at the River Heights Theater. Nancy smiled. "You've talked me into it. I guess there's nothing more I can do tonight on the mystery anyway. By morning, however, the young detective's thoughts were back on the mystery. At breakfast, and on the way to and from church, she reviewed the various angles of the mail theft. Dad, do you suppose with Ira Nixon's slight clue about the name Malmesbury, I could get a copy of the letter sent to me? Mr. Drew smiled. I believe so. Tomorrow morning I'll make a phone call to a lawyer friend in London. I'll ask him to look in the telephone directory and see what he can find out for us. That afternoon, Nancy went to call on Ira Nixon in the hospital. He said no tests had been made yet, since it was Sunday, but these would be taken care of the following morning. I suppose you're wondering, he said, whether or not I have thought of any more clues to help you find your missing letter. He lowered his voice. Mind you, what I'm about to say I don't believe down deep in my heart, but it will explain why I fainted yesterday at your house. The mail carrier told about his half-brother Edgar. It was a repetition of what Hannah Gruen had already revealed. Ira added, however, that when Nancy had mentioned a man in a yellow coat with a beat-up car and part of his license plate number, he had thought for a moment it was his brother. But I'm sure it wasn't, he said. Edgar may be an annoyance to me, but I'm sure he's not a thief. Nancy did not comment. Instead, she asked, what did my little friend Tommy mean by a yellow coat? A smile flickered across Ira's face. Actually, it's a camel's hair coat. His hat is, too. A striking outfit, and incidentally, Edgar is rather handsome. A nurse stepped into the room to announce that visiting hours were over for the afternoon. Nancy said goodbye to the letter carrier and left. The following morning, Mr. Drew telephoned her from his office to report that he had talked to his friend in London. I have good news for you, Nancy. There is a law firm in the city by the names of Malmesbury and Bates Jones. I'm sure that's the one, Nancy said excitedly. I hope so, her father replied. In any case, my friend will telephone to them and find out if they send a letter to you. He'll tell them the circumstances of your not receiving it and request a duplicate. On the other hand, if this is not the right firm, my friend will try to find the person who did write to you. Dad, that's wonderful, Nancy exclaimed. I hope we hear something soon. I'm pretty sure they wouldn't be able to do that now because of HIPAA. This was written in the 30s. Her father chuckled. When you were a little girl, Nancy, you were always eager to have things happen. I used to say to you, hold your horses. Now I'm saying it again. Don't get your hopes up too high. Nancy laughed. Spoken like a lawyer, she teased, and then said goodbye. As soon as luncheon was over, Nancy told Hannah Gruen she was tired of staying in the house and waiting for news. I'm going to do some investigating, she announced. Where are you going? The housekeeper asked. To talk to some of Ira Nixon's neighbors. They may give me a clue that will be helpful in tracking down this Edgar Nixon. Despite Ira's faith in him, I think he's a good suspect. Mrs. Gruen agreed and kissed Nancy goodbye. The young detective drove to the other side of town and found Ira Nixon's little old-fashioned home. As she parked in front of the house, two women crossed the street and introduced themselves as Mrs. Malley and Mrs. O'Brien. They wanted to know if Nancy could tell them about the mail carrier's condition. He's better, she replied. In a way, he's fortunate that he got into the hospital. It sure is, Mrs. O'Brien interrupted her. The poor old man doesn't eat right. Yes, her neighbor Mrs. Malley agreed, and added, he worries all the time about that no-good brother of his. Although curious to learn more about Ira's brother, Nancy commented cautiously, I've heard about Edgar. Tell me, is he really as bad as all that? Well, of course I don't know what goes on inside the house when he comes there, Mrs. O'Brien went on. But I know the effect on Ira. He's just all in after one of those visits. Mrs. Malley leaned forward confidentially. Edgar was here this morning. Of course he couldn't get in. I guess he didn't know where his brother was, and I, for one, wouldn't tell him. Me either, Mrs. O'Brien declared. That Edgar is nasty. A lot of papers blew off the seat of his car, and he wouldn't take time to pick them up. He littered the street, and we had to go around and clean up. Nancy asked eagerly, where are the papers now? We put them in a trash can. Good place for him. They might be important, Nancy said. May I see them? The two women looked at each other, puzzled, but led the girl to Mrs. Malley's backyard. She opened the trash can and said, there they are. Nancy lifted them out one by one. All were letters and looked as if they had fallen into water. Most of the writing was illegible. One had had the top torn from it, and all but a few words had been obliterated, but the remaining few caught Nancy's attention. This must be part of the letter which had come to her from London. All that remained was... There's a bunch of dots, ellipses. Drew, colon, dot, 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 dot. Money has been left, dot, 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 dot. I'd like to take this one along, she said. Help yourself, said Mrs. Malley. They don't belong to me anyway. They're just trash. I suggest, said Nancy, that you call the postal inspector and tell him about these letters. She rushed home. Her father was there, and she showed the sheet to him and Hannah Gruen. Both were amazed, but unable to decipher the intriguing message. Do you suppose somebody in England has left me some money? Nancy asked. It looks that way, her father replied, but who could it be? After staring at the paper for a while, Nancy began to calm down. I'm sure there must be some mistake, she said. I'm certainly not going to get my hopes up of becoming a millionaire. Her father and Mrs. Gruen laughed and said this was a sensible attitude to take. But, the housekeeper added, I hope a copy of the whole letter will come soon. I can't stand the suspense myself. On Tuesday morning, Nancy told Hannah Gruen that she was going on a shopping trip. You remember I'm going to spend the weekend at Emerson College? I need a few things, and this is a good time to get them. As she was about to pull out of the driveway, Nancy spotted a battered tan car parked down the street. It suddenly occurred to her that Edgar Nixon, or whoever had stolen the letters from the Drew home, might be watching her. At this distance, the person inside the car was too indistinct for her to identify, but she decided to get a closer look and started down the block. At once, the other car moved ahead. As she drew nearer, the driver suddenly turned around. The next second, he shot off at high speed. He certainly acts guilty, Nancy thought, and gave her own car greater power. Abruptly, the man turned down a side street, went a few blocks without pausing at intersections, and turned left out of sight. Nancy followed as quickly as she dared. When she reached the spot where he had made the last turn, Nancy could see him in the distance. The road proved to be an undeveloped one and had no side streets. She was able to follow him more quickly and soon almost caught up to him. Now she could see the license plate. It was TJ12796. That is Edgar Nixon, she thought. I mustn't lose him. In the next few seconds, Nancy neared a wooden bridge. She was almost directly behind the fugitive now. This bridge looks pretty rickety, she said to herself. Do I dare cross it? Edgar Nixon took the chance and sped over it. He made the distance without anything happening. Nancy went after him, but drove cautiously. Her car was much heavier, she knew. When Nancy was at the halfway mark, cracking sounds came from the dilapidated bridge. End of chapter 3. We should, have a counter for every car chase scene in every Nancy Drew book, because I feel like there's always a scene where Nancy follows somebody in a car. Always. Always. Pretty sure that's not a real law. CJ! Welcome for joining, CJ. CJ will try to fill in the missing chapters in his brain. You haven't missed much. There was a mail carrier who was carrying a letter to Nancy from England, and also a letter to Mr. Drew that had money in it from one of his clients. And those letters got stolen by this guy's half-brother, is what they think. And so Nancy is on the case. That's pretty much it. Yellow coat. Making a coat out of a camel? You'd look like a hunchback. Yeah, I've never heard of a camel coat. Car chase counter 1. A camel coat. I kind of want to look it up. Camel coat. Oh, okay. It's not as... I mean, it's tan. Here. For your reference. Hey, Shroom. Lexi. How did Ira Nixon come into the store? So Ira Nixon is the mail carrier. He was the one bringing the letters to everybody. There's the camel coat thing. I guess it's camel hair? Yeah, I don't know. And his brother is Edgar Nixon, or his half-brother. And there's some... They don't get along. There's some weird thing about inheritance. And Edgar was going to sue Ira for the inheritance or something. I don't know. So we're kind of... CJ Ned is in this book. He is, I think. And he's in the hospital. He fainted when he found out that Nancy... He fainted in Nancy's house when Nancy described the thief, who seemed to be his half-brother. You just ruined my day. How are you, Shroom? Lexi. Hashtag blame Paige. I did pick the book. It's true, I did pick the book, but I didn't know Ned was going to be in it. So, I don't know if you can fully blame me. You're doing okay. How's work? How's library stuff? Let's wait for a couple minutes so I can start the music over. Isn't Ned in most of them? Yeah. I guess, I mean, he didn't show up until a certain number, right? But I don't know which number that is. Maybe like 4 or 5. And this is 8. So I guess, yeah, that makes sense. I'm gonna have to get more tea. I have orange juice, but I don't know if that helps with throat stuff. Work is good. I just presented my first library program on Monday night. Ooh. What kind of program, can I ask? That sounds exciting. I have not heard anything back from job stuff yet. I sent them an email yesterday because I just wanted to be sure they got my application, so we'll see. I would really like to hear something. Kind of nerve-wracking, but I don't know how long it takes people to get back, really, because of course it just kind of depends on the employer, but real fast I'm going to go put in some laundry. Okay. I'll wait for you, CJ. I need to do that too. The laundry. I was teaching people about podcasts. Oh, cool. Well, that sounds fun. That sounds awesome. What kind of podcast? Just like in general? Did you name any like specific podcasts? Since we're on the topic of podcasts, this is a podcast I tell everyone about. Have you heard of Grown-Ups Read Things They Wrote as Kids? It's a Canadian podcast. It's so good. I'm obsessed with it. What they are, the different apps you can use. Okay. Yeah, so in general. That's cool. Yeah, so this podcast, the reason you haven't heard of it? Yeah, it sounds awesome. It is what it sounds like. You should look it up. I recommend it. It's great. It can be really funny, just like hilarious. So, the weirdest thing of how we found it, when we were living in Japan, if you know anything about Japan, the trash system and recycling system is very, very complex. And the recycling system, you have to separate every type of recycling, basically. And you have to break everything down and then, like, tie it up a certain way, and then of course they only go in certain places and are picked up at certain times. And so because we were kind of overwhelmed by all the rules, we waited until the very end of the semester to do all of our recycling, to break all of it down. Well, not all of it, but like we did it like halfway through and then again at the end. And so we needed something to do, like while we were mindlessly breaking down cardboard and paper items. So Keegan picked out a podcast and he found this one. And it was just amazing. And I was like, okay. So that was like really my first introduction to podcasts, because I hadn't really listened to them before. But I really enjoyed that one. I'm behind still. I'm like 2 years behind because there was a period where I just didn't listen. But yeah, they're really good. I follow the guy on like Twitter and stuff just because, I don't know, I think it's awesome. And if I ever go to Canada, I want to like try to go to one of their shows. So they've been doing their show for like 10 or 15 years, but they only started the podcast like in the last few years, I guess. Well, it's been at least 4. But yeah, that sounds terrible. We have to cut our cardboard town down into 2x2 squares and tie them up with twine. Wow. That sounds very Japanese, because that's kind of, yeah, it had to be a certain size, and you had to tie them up with a certain material, and it had to be like twine. That sounds very Japanese. We don't have to do that here, but... And I actually don't know if we have to break our cardboard down, but I do it out of habit now, because that's just what we did when we were in Japan, so that's what I did when we moved back. But I don't know if that's something that we have to do. Our rules are pretty much don't put plastic bags in the recycling bin. For whatever reason. And don't put your recycling in bags. So you just have to empty it into the big tub. This is also how I knew I was an adult. I was very excited to get my own garbage and recycling bin. Because at our apartment, we didn't have any recycling, so we had to do it ourselves. And we just had a very large green bin at the end of the street that we had to walk to and put our trash in. So when we bought our house, I was very excited to get a trash can and a recycling bin of our own. And that's the sad reality when you know you're an adult. CJ, are you done? I'm done with my podcast and recycling story. Do you have any favorite podcasts, Lexi? I'm all caught up on the Nancy Drew podcast, except for the ones where there are spoilers for the games that I haven't played. And there aren't that many episodes with spoilers, so I haven't missed too much. But I really liked the one with the guy who had the story about how he became a voice actor because he worked at Skywalker Ranch. And I thought that story was amazing. Thought that was so cool. And then Argo Thump was just ridiculous. Actually, I think there's a new one out that I haven't listened to yet. All this adult talk is depressing. Let's read Nancy Drew. I agree. Because after this, I need to do adult stuff, like go get prescriptions and do the laundry, and it is depressing. Okay. I thought CJ was gonna be fast, but okay. We're gonna start chapter 4. CJ, hurry! I don't actually listen to podcasts. My boss assigned me this program. Okay, well, I gave you a podcast you can go listen to. I think they're at least on Google Play and iTunes. I don't know about the other stuff. I'm assuming, do you listen to the Nancy Drew ones? You can just listen to those on YouTube. That's what I usually do, and I do it when I fold laundry. Because I need something to do while I'm mindlessly... I hate folding laundry. Anyways, go listen to that podcast. Hashtag ad. Okay, Chapter 4, Doubtful Inheritance. In a flash, Nancy shifted to reverse. The convertible shot backward just in time to keep it from breaking through the bridge. "Oh," she said aloud. Shaken by her experience, Nancy pulled to the side of the road and parked. When her heart stopped pounding, she began to think once more about Edgar Nixon. "I wonder where he went," she thought. Nancy turned around and went back to River Heights. She stopped at police headquarters and asked to see Chief McGinnis. The desk sergeant buzzed his superior officer, and after a short conversation to announce Nancy, told her to go into the man's private office. He smiled at her. "More clues?" he asked. "Yes, one. I don't know how good it is." She told him about having spotted Edgar Nixon's car. While she was not sure he was the person driving it, Nancy felt it was worthwhile to follow up the lead. "The road has no signs, but it's the one with the old bridge. He got across, but I almost crashed through into the water." The chief frowned. "Nancy, you must be more careful." She asked him whether he had any clues for her. He shook his head. "Not a single clue to that man's whereabouts," McGinnis said. "But I'll put some men on this new clue right away. Thanks for coming in, Nancy." Before returning home, she decided to stop at the hospital and visit Ira Nixon. When Nancy arrived at his room, she was surprised to find a strange man in it. "You looking for the mail carrier?" he asked. "Yes." "He's gone home. After the doctor saw him this morning, he said Ira could go. Nice old fellow. I hope he gets along all right." Nancy hoped so too. She looked at her watch. "I'll go to see him at his home after lunch," she told the patient. Oh, it was a patient. They could have said whether it was like a nurse or a doctor or a patient or just some random person in a hospital room. By 2 o'clock, she was at Ira Nixon's house, carrying a jar of Mrs. Groon's homemade stew. When she rang, he called, "Come in." Nancy found him reclining on a couch in his tiny living room. He looked much better than he had on Sunday. "Hannah Groon sent you this stew," Nancy said. She smiled. "I can tell you it's delicious." "That housekeeper of yours is a fine, kind woman," Ira Nixon said, "and she's one of a few people a man likes to confide in." Oh, sorry. Okay. I'll catch up. Nancy did not want to upset the mail carrier, so she refrained from mentioning Edgar, but Ira brought up the subject himself. How convenient. "Would you like to see a picture of Edgar?" "Oh, yes," Nancy replied. He brought it from a desk drawer, and Nancy gazed at the photograph. As Ira had said, Edgar was handsome, but his eyes were as cold as steel, and she instantly felt that he was not a person who could be trusted. She refrained from saying anything, except that he was an attractive-looking man. Ira Nixon smiled. "The girls always liked him, and he liked them, but he never got married." "May I borrow this photograph?" Nancy asked. The mail carrier misunderstood her request. He remarked with a grin, "So you like him too? Same as the rest of the ladies." Nancy did not comment. "Why wouldn't you set him right?" He must not know right now she wanted the picture for identification. She rose and said she must go. "I'll put this stew in your refrigerator," Nancy said. "Thank you. I'll have some for my dinner. And please thank Mrs. Groon." Nancy slipped the photograph into her purse, then carried the jar of stew to the kitchen. Driving home, she wondered just how she might use Edgar's photograph to get more information about him. Nancy decided first to find Tommy and went to his house. Without telling her suspicions, she held up the photograph for him to look at. Instantly he said, "He's the man in the yellow coat." Nancy was thrilled. This seemed to identify Edgar Nixon positively as the thief who had stolen his half-brother's mail. But before reporting this to the postal inspector, Nancy decided to investigate the gas stations in River Heights and on the outskirts for further proof. She drove from one to another, but none of the attendants remembered ever having seen the man in the photograph. "Guess he buys his gas somewhere else," most of them remarked. Nancy was becoming discouraged. She was about to give up when she recalled having once stopped at a small place on the outskirts of River Heights. The station was on the road leading to Emerson, where Ned's college was located. She turned the car in that direction, and a few minutes later pulled up to the pump. A pleasant young man came to help her. 5 gallons, please," Nancy said. When the attendant finished putting it in, she paid him, then pulled out the photograph of Edgar Nixon. "Has this man ever stopped here for gas?" she asked. The attendant studied the picture a few moments. "Mealmints. Yes, he's been in several times. For a moment I didn't recognize him. When he comes here, he's always wearing a hat and overcoat." "Are they camel's hair?" Nancy asked quickly. "That's the man." Nancy inquired if the attendant knew his name and where he lived. "No, he's not the talkative type. Somehow I got the idea, though, that he lives in some distant town, but comes to River Heights quite often. He never says why." "How recently has he been here?" The man's answer startled Nancy. "Come to think of it, he stopped yesterday. I suppose you're trying to find him. Maybe this will help you. He made a phone call from that booth over there, and as I went by, I heard him say Miss Drew." "Is that all you heard?" Nancy asked, astounded. "That's all." The attendant turned away to serve an arriving customer. Nancy drove off, wondering whether Edgar Nixon could have been talking about her. As Nancy let herself into the Drew house about 20 minutes later, she was just in time to answer the telephone. Her father was calling. "Nancy, I'd like you to come down here immediately. I have something amazing to show you." "I'll be there right away." She dashed back outside and turned her convertible in the direction of her father's office. After saying hello to his secretary, Miss Hanson, Nancy went directly into Mr. Drew's private office. He handed her a letter saying, "What do you think of this new mystery?" Nancy sat down in a big chair and started to read. Her eyes grew larger and larger. The letter was from London, on the stationery of Malmesbury and Bates Jones. It read... Here, I'm going to do this in a British accent. It may be terrible. Hopefully no English people are here to offend. "My dear Miss Drew, this is to inform you it is possible I'm already messing it up. An inheritance has been left to you. We are the legal representatives of the estate of Jonathan Smith, late of Little Cottington, Midhampton, Berks, who died intestate on May 2, last. Mr. Smith had as only kin a sister, from whom he was estranged, Mrs. Genevieve Smith Drew. We find she predeceased Mr. Smith by 5 years, leaving a daughter, who is Mr. Smith's sole heir by law. We have learned that the daughter, Miss Nancy Smith Drew, is in the United States, where our agents have been trying to trace her. You are the only Miss Nancy Drew so far discovered by them, and we beg of you to communicate with us. If you happen to be the Miss Drew for whom we are searching, will you be so good as to submit proofs of your identity, whereupon we shall be happy to make arrangements for your return to England to claim the inheritance. Sincerely, A. E. Lionel Bates Jones." Okay. When Nancy finished reading the letter, she looked at her father, who had been watching her closely. He smiled. "You are almost an heiress," the lawyer said with a chuckle. Nancy sighed. "How I wish I was the right Nancy Drew." Her father's eyes twinkled. "Then you wouldn't have the fun of a mystery to solve," he said. "You're right," she agreed. "May I use one of your phones and start trying to find Nancy Smith Drew?" "Go ahead. In the meantime, I'll make an overseas call to this law firm and tell them the facts." Nancy waited while he gave the number, but the lawyer was told that the Atlantic lines would be tied up for several hours. He turned to Nancy. "Maybe you'll have this case solved before I can put through the phone call," he teased. His daughter laughed. "I wish it was that easy." Nancy phoned the police department and the post office. Nancy Smith Drew was not known at either place. Directories and telephone books gave no clue. Nancy said goodbye to her father and drove home. Bess and George were there and were eager to hear the latest news. When Nancy gave them all the facts, the cousins gasped. George remarked, "Things are certainly breaking fast." Now you have 2 mysteries on your hands. Well, tell us what we can do to help. Right now, I don't have an idea in my head, Nancy confessed, but I'll let you know. She invited the girls to stay to dinner, and they accepted at once. Mr. Drew had already told Hannah Groon he would not be home until later, so the 4 of them ate without him. They had just finished dessert when the doorbell rang. I'll get it, Nancy said. When she opened the door, a strange woman angrily forced her way inside and stepped toward the living room. The caller was poorly dressed in a worn-looking coat. Its collar was pulled up to her stringy, bleached hair. "You're Nancy Drew, ain't you?" When the girl nodded, the woman added, "You're the one I'm looking for." With that, her fist shot out, and she tried to hit Nancy. End of chapter 4. Oh my. Scandalous. Okay, let me catch up. Nope, I don't even listen to those because Hugh complained about the quality. Well, Hugh is correct. The quality of those podcasts, I hate to say, are not the best. And since they're, like, associated with a professional company that makes games for a living, they should be of high quality, but they're not. The editing, the sound, the audio quality itself, I understand, like, sometimes they're Skyping with people or, like, bringing them into a voice chat or something, but even, like, the original quality is not great. Like, they're obviously not using that great of equipment. I don't know, it's just frustrating, and, like, I'm not gonna go into more detail because I'm not hating on her or anybody associated with her because, you know, I love them, and even though the fans are frustrated, you know, I understand their desire to do the podcast and, you know, make another connection with fans, and, like, it's a cool idea. I think it's what they're doing and what they're trying to do is good. But the execution is not where it should be in terms of professional podcast creating. Especially when it's associated with a professional company. That's my opinion. Hi, Terry. I know, right? He doesn't like Ragnarok either. Oh. I do like Ragnarok. I don't like the turn they took with the comedy because it feels like Guardians of the Galaxy, and I hate Guardians of the Galaxy. And I know I'm the only person on the planet who hates Guardians of the Galaxy. For me, there's a fine line between, like, 7th grade boy humor and stupid humor. I can do 7th grade boy humor, but stupid humor is just so... I have no tolerance for it whatsoever. Hi, lol, most times I've seen him active, it's in show or movie talk, and it's usually about how awful something is. Yep. Maybe I should ignore his opinions. Or I'm going to spend 10 minutes searching for a missing sock! Oh, CJ! We were wondering where you were. We had to start without you. I have so many missing socks still. I'm really paranoid about socks not having pairs, so I have to pair them up before they go in the washer. Oh, that's a good strategy. One of them was stuck inside something else. So you did find it? You did find the sock? Ragnarok was the best Thor movie. That's true. That's true. Ragnarok was the best Thor movie. Although it did not have Kat Dennings in it. And that's sad because I love Kat Dennings. She's amazing. So that's like the only good thing out of the first movie was Kat Dennings. And then the second movie was okay. It wasn't horrible. But gosh, Natalie Portman. And her character, like, I don't understand why they changed it and why they had to make it so disgusting and ridiculous and just not useful. Ugh. Hey Summer, it's your favorite season now, isn't it? Welcome for padding. When did you start using that colorful language? This just in, Paige doesn't want no Brits in her stream. What? No, that's not what I said! That would be very hypocritical of me because I'm 58% British. I'm 58% British. No, I would love Brits in my stream. Actually, technically, we have had Brits in our stream because technically, Julia's British. She is Scottish, but she's British because she is a part of the Kingdom of Great Britain. There you go. Fun facts. Favorite. No, I am not excluding anyone in my stream. Nope. You guys, don't put words in my mouth. Accent 5 out of 10. I know I need to work on it. I'm an Anglophile that way. I'm a pretty big Anglophile too. Imagining you speaking it, but you have a very un-English accent. I think I was trying to do posh, but I can do a better, like, Cockney accent. Yeah, I wish my accent was better because I'm basically full Brit. I just don't have an accent. That's how British I am. I wasn't trying to convince you, HS, just stating my opinion about how goodly I think Ragnarok is. Ragnarok is godly. I heard her fish shot out, then I realized it was fist. Oh! Ah! Nancy has a fish. Do you think Tammy has to do all by herself? Probably. Which, in my opinion, doesn't excuse it. I love her and always think they can do better. That's how my love is. Yeah. Even myself. I agree, Lexi. I always find the sock eventually, but I don't stop until I do. CJ is sock determined. MCU likes to assassinate characters when they get too awesome. Just opted to twist what you said into what, like, BuzzFeed or TMZ article. Or New York Post article. Well, everyone is welcome in my stream, unless you're being hateful, and then you're going away. But all of you are lovely people, and nobody's hateful here, so. Terror should never work for the media, confirmed. He's too good at it. Okay, I think we should go for another chapter. CJ, do you need a catch-up? Do you need a summary? Still annoyed she blocked me on Twitter. I'm annoyed that she blocked you on Twitter. Also, the whole, like, repeating the same questions over and over again, that, and, like, that, and, ending it the same exact way. I don't know. I mean, I know there's a structure to podcasts, and it should sound familiar, but, like, why not be afraid to mix it up? Or why not mix it up? Like, that didn't make sense. Why not mix it up? Like, why ask the same questions over and over again? It doesn't make sense to me. I don't... Like, I can probably tell you 5 questions she always asks from those podcasts. Hi, her. I want you to be straightforward, accountable. Wait, you just blocked me? Rude, not Dan. My dad is talking to me. Okay. Hi, CJ Dad. I'm sure I look really goofy. I'm just looking at my hair in the webcam. And then her is like, what's Dan? Okay, summary of the chapter. Okay. Oh, sorry. I keep putting the book in the plate. because I don't have a bookmark in here. So we're not sure who was in the car that Nancy was chasing. Ira Nixon is no longer in the hospital. He gave her a picture of Edgar, and Nancy is taking it. She took it to the little boy who saw the man in the beginning, and she asked the little boy if that's who he saw, and he said yes. Then she also took the picture to gas stations and asked anybody if they saw him, and she found out that he filled up in River Heights yesterday, and that he made a phone call and said Miss Drew in the phone call, and then Mr. Drew tracked down the letter that Nancy received from London, and it was about an inheritance for Miss Nancy Drew Smith, or Nancy Smith Drew, who now resides in the U.S., but it's obviously not her, so Nancy wanted to find out about Nancy Smith Drew, and she hasn't found anything out yet. And then there's a girl in Nancy's house who tried to punch her, and that's where we left off. Paige read words and we listened to words. Wow, Terry! Great summary! I should get my first edition of this book and see how much they changed it. Yeah! Yeah, you should. That's what I would love to collect all the first editions. I have only a couple. Oh, and Punching a Girl. Doppelganger. So, okay. Let us read Chapter 5, The Mysterious Gift. Though taken unawares, Nancy managed to dodge the woman's blow. She grabbed the stranger's arm and held it firm. "What are you trying to do?" she asked. "What do you want?" "What I want are my rights," the woman shouted. "Who are you?" Nancy asked. She was sure she had never seen the woman before. "I am Mrs. Skeets, and now that you've heard it, you'll never forget it. And don't tell me you're not Nancy Drew, because I've seen you running around town in that car of yours. I don't approve of young girls having cars. There are too many accidents as it is." "Did you come here to lecture me about my driving?" Nancy asked the woman coldly. "Certainly not. Anyway, I know it wouldn't do no good. Girls today don't mind what their elders think. They go flying around as if they owned the earth." "Will you please get to the point?" Nancy interrupted her caller. "Don't be pert, miss," Mrs. Skeets said. "I'll tell you in my own good time why I came here." Nancy gritted her teeth. Was this woman unbalanced? She decided that perhaps if she did not answer, Mrs. Skeets would finally tell why she had come. What you got to say about what you did?" What you got to say about what you did?" the woman demanded. Nancy heaved a sigh. "Mrs. Skeets, will you please tell me why you came here? I am not aware that I have ever met you or done anything to you." "Well, to begin with, I'm Mrs. Maud Skeets. I'm Sailor Joe Skeets' wife, which is my bad luck. Never forgive him for forever sailing off to all corners of the world and leaving me to get along the best I can." The woman took a deep breath before going on. "Joe's got a sister. She don't look like him. She don't act like him neither. One thing I must say, he ain't stingy. But that sister of his, all the money in the world and her not turning a finger, but the money just pouring in because her husband invented some sort of stuff that takes stains out of cloth. Well, she condescends to send me $10 a week, if you please. And where was last week's, I ask you?" She stared hard at Nancy. "I haven't the least idea," Nancy replied. "What makes you think I should know something about it?" "Because my letter was in that bunch that was stolen from your house, and you're to blame." Mrs. Skeets almost screamed. Nancy was amazed. She told the woman that she certainly was not to blame for the mail theft. "I never saw any of the letters that were taken. Perhaps yours wasn't among them." The day it was supposed to come was Saturday, and one thing I will say about Joe's sister, she's always on time. No, that letter with the money in it was stolen," I'm terribly sorry, said Nancy, but as I said before, I'm not to blame. Since there is nothing more to discuss, I'll bid you goodbye. She held the door open. Now see here, young lady, you aren't going to get rid of me that fast. You give me the $10 and I'll go. Nancy's reply was firm. I am not giving you $10. I love how sassy Nancy is in this. Mrs. Skeets tossed her head. Uppity, eh? She said. Then, seeing Bess, George, and Hannah Gruen, who had come to the hall to see what the trouble was, she said sneeringly, Reinforcements, eh? Well, that won't do you no good. You're just like all the other Nancy Drews. What do you mean? Nancy demanded. How have you known? Have you known many? Have I known many of them? Thank goodness, no. Mrs. Skeets said, flinging her hands into the air. Just you and the other one, and you're both cut out the same cloth. Cheat people out of $10 and then pretend they're fine ladies and don't know nothing about it. Nancy asked Mrs. Skeets about the other Nancy Drew, but the woman refused to tell her anything. I'll make a bargain with you, she said. You give me $10 and I'll tell you. Nancy was wary that this might be a ruse of some kind and decided to try a few tactics of her own. If I change my mind, I'll come to see you tomorrow, she told Mrs. Skeets. Suits me, the woman grinned. I'll bet you'll be around to see me. My house is 22 Cottage Street. It's not far from here, but it's not a grand neighborhood like yours. We're just plain folks over there. With this cutting remark, she turned and went outside. Boy, is she ever a weirdo, George exclaimed. Further discussion was interrupted by the telephone. Hannah Gruen picked it up and in a moment said, It's your father, Nancy, and he says it's important. By the way, there was a picture on the other side, so let me show you this. You're to blame, Mrs. Skeets screamed. That's silly. Okay, I like how they say that she's poor, but in the illustration, they have her, like, wearing a fur coat. That makes absolutely no sense. Makes no sense. I like the piano, though. CJ's in this picture! Okay. I finally got an overseas call through to Mr. Bates-Jones, Mr. Drew said. Nancy, the inheritance is sizable. He wants you to solve the mystery of the missing Nancy Drew. The girl chuckled. Wonderful. Nothing I'd like better. And Dad, I have a clue. What is it? She related the visit of the strange Mrs. Skeets, including the bargain to exchange information for the $10. Do you think I should do it? Yes, I do. Then I'll go there tomorrow morning. The following day, while Nancy was tidying up her room before leaving the house, Mrs. Gruen came in, holding a long evening dress over one arm. You haven't forgotten you're going to wear this Saturday evening, have you? She teased. I'm afraid I had. The housekeeper reminded her that the dress had to be shortened. You'd break your neck in it at this length, she said. Please put it on now and let me pin up the hem. Then I'll sew it while you're gone. Nancy took off her skirt and sweater and slipped on the pale blue evening dress. Glancing at herself in the mirror, she realized something was missing. Nancy studied herself as Hannah pinned up the skirt and kept telling her to turn a little at a time. Suddenly, Nancy realized what the costume needed, the lovely pearl necklace Mr. Drew had given her on her last birthday. The clasp is loose, she thought. Before I go to Mrs. Skeets' house, I'll run down to the jeweler's with the necklace and have it fixed. As soon as the housekeeper had finished pinning the hem, Nancy took off the dress. She put on her sports clothes once more, took the necklace from a drawer, and grabbed a coat. Wish me luck, she said, kissing Mrs. Gruen goodbye. I hope to bring home lots of news. She drove directly to the center of town and parked. Mrs. Whittier's... That's funny. Mr. Whittier's jewelry shop was a block away. Nancy hurried down the street and entered the store. Good morning, Mr. Whittier, she said to the elderly man behind the counter. I think the clasp on my pearl necklace needs tightening. She took it from her purse. The jeweler looked at it closely. It certainly does, he said. Are you in a hurry for it? Nancy told him she planned to take the necklace with her on Friday. I'm going to Emerson for the weekend. Then I'll fix this right away. As Mr. Whittier went to a room at the rear of the shop, he called out, You caught me at a good time. I'm not particularly busy now. Make yourself comfortable. While waiting, Nancy looked at the large assortment of rings, bracelets, pins, and other bits of jewelry in the display cases. How beautiful they all were. Time passed quickly, and soon the jeweler returned. He showed Nancy that the clasp worked perfectly now. As he was wrapping it for her, Mr. Whittier said, "How did you like your beautiful new pin?" "Pen?" Nancy repeated. "What pen?" "The one that man got for you yesterday. He said he was going to give it to you right away." Nancy was puzzled. What man was going to give her a pen? End of chapter 5. Okay. So Nancy's letter was not for her, but Carson's still was? Yes. The letter for Carson was from a client, and it just had money in it, and they sorted that out because Carson talked to his client. But I think his client was upset that the money got lost. Wow, I can't even figure out where we are in this edition. Oh, found it. Quiz? Nancy is cold. She's way sassier in the first edition. Ooh, that's cool. HS, you're taunting me with material I will never see. Hello, me. $10. Nancy came out here with no money. Something's missing here. This scene is totally not in the first edition.
Sorry, I'm late. 7 months.
Oh my gosh. The echoing. Oh my gosh, V! Thank you! 7 months? No way. Have you been subscribed for 7 months? Okay, well thank you, V. Thank you for subbing, resubbing. That's so sweet. You didn't have to, but thank you. Thank you for your support. It means a lot, especially right now when I'm not streaming consistently, and for you to still be subscribed is awesome, so I appreciate it. Yeah, she is 7 months. That's crazy. She's way too girly in this scene. Echo, echo, echo. I don't know what that echo is, because it's clearly something like within the system or within OBS, and I'm not sure. We're gonna have to mess with that to fix it. CJ, should I do read streams in my... Yes, you should! Lexi, that would be awesome! Especially because I love your voice. Like, I'm obsessed with your voice. I always have been. I don't know why. Your voice is just really awesome. And that would be so cool to hear the first 3 original editions. Okay. Welcome for Be Right Backing. I don't hear an echo. No, the echo on the alerts, like the sub alert, it echoed like a bunch when it read out the 7-month thing that V said. V, how are you? How are you doing? You're streaming later today, right? You have it too. What do you mean to... Oh, you have the echo on your stream. That's weird. You've had a crazy day? Oh. Do you want to tell us about it? You don't have to, but... I'm glad you're okay. Yes, when Holland gets here, like 3 or 3:30. Cool. What are you streaming? Last playing Hamtaro. Ham Heartbreak. I need to use something that's not a plate to keep my place in the book. I think we can go for one more chapter, at least. Wind Waker. Oh, cool. Rip Telltale. I didn't know they made a Guardians. Yeah, that's sad about Telltale. That whole thing is just kind of unfortunate. Oh, you guys! Another hype thing. Oh, you know what? I think it may actually be already released. Or at least available to download. First episode of Life is Strange 2 released. Either today or tomorrow. Maybe it's tonight at midnight. I don't know. But that's exciting. I still need to play Captain Spirit. I don't know if I'd stream that. Well, it's on the Xbox, and right now the way things are set up, I won't be able to stream Xbox stuff for a while. Could probably do Switch, though. Anyways, I just had a long list of to-dos for today, and then my work called me panicking and needed me to come in for like a little bit, and so I had to drop everything and rush to get cleaned up and go to work. Ugh. Just got home. Well, now you can relax. Chill out. Wait, 3-year time. Yeah. So I may just do one more chapter and then finish the stream. Guardians the game is better than movies? Oh, humor is less stupid. Oh, okay. I might actually be willing to play it then. Let me ask you this. Lexi, ooh, British friend. Right now, like they're streaming it? Okay, let me ask you this. Does Bradley Cooper still, and Chris Pratt, are they still involved in the video game at all? Like, do they do voice acting or anything? If they don't, then maybe I'd play it. I don't like either one of those. I really like, I mean, Groot is the best part of Guardians. I think everybody agrees on that, though. British friends, Swedish friends. She's streaming it right now. Ooh. No, they're not. Okay. Then maybe I'll check it out. I just didn't realize they made a Telltale. I still am planning, I'll probably stream it, doing The Wolf Among Us. Wait, is it The Wolf Among Us, or is it... Yeah. I think it is. Vin Diesel is the best part of Guardians. Yeah. Napping and listening to my English friend speedrun. Voices like butter. I'd be here. Okay. Alright, let's start chapter 6. And we'll probably call it after that. Was solid. And yeah, sad the second got canned. Maybe somebody will pick it up, because I know there was like a lot of anticipation for it. I don't know how that works in the game world, but that'd be cool if somebody else, if another company could buy the rights to it and pick up the story. And yeah, I don't know. Remind me, one of my mods, Terry B, remind me at the end of our stream before I quit to check for somebody to host or raid, because I should probably do that, and I've never actually done a raid on the new system, I don't think, so I'd like to try it. Thank you, Terry. Okay, without further ado, Chapter 6, A Good Lead. You look surprised, said Mr. Whittier. I guess I gave away a secret. Oh, it's all right, Nancy assured him, without divulging what was racing through her mind. The pen might be going to Nancy Smith Drew, and here was her chance to find the heiress. Nancy did not reveal her thoughts, however. Smiling, she said, I must confess I haven't the least idea who might be giving me a pen, but it sounds exciting. I don't suppose you want to tell me who it is? The jeweler sighed. I've told so much already, I guess it won't matter. He said his name was Mr. Nixon, and that he is from out of town. Nancy was startled. Was he Edgar Nixon? Was he a friend of the heiress, or of some other Nancy Drew? Maybe Edgar Nixon is going to give the pen to me, but there'll be some trick to it if he does, Nancy decided. Mr. Whittier looked at her quizzically. You seem kind of worried, he remarked. I'm sorry I said anything, and please, when Mr. Nixon hands you the pen, don't let on I gave away a secret. Nancy assured him she would not. Suddenly she smiled. If this man is the person I think he is, he's related to someone I know very well. Would you mind telling me what he looks like? Well, he's kind of handsome, you might say, Mr. Whittier replied. Very thin and dark. What was he wearing? Nancy asked. She was not surprised to learn that the purchaser of the pen had worn a camel's hair coat and hat. In her mind, this settled it. The buyer was indeed Edgar Nixon, but where did she possibly fit into the picture? Mr. Whittier handed Nancy the necklace. Come in again soon, he invited her. I'll have all my Christmas things on display next week. His suggestion gave Nancy an idea. Recalling a remark her father had made, she said, Mr. Whittier, in a magazine advertisement I saw a special kind of cufflinks I know my dad would like. They were large gold squares and had diagonal stripes of black across them. I'd like a set to give Dad for Christmas. I know the pattern well, said Mr. Whittier. I'll order a pair if you like. Please do, and let me know when they come in. Speaking of cufflinks, said the jeweler, Mr. Nixon bought a pair for himself. Kind of flashy, but he seemed to like 'em. They were bright red and had a black star in the center. Instantly, Nancy thought what an excellent identification this was. Aloud, she said, I don't think I'd care for them myself. Shortly thereafter, Nancy left the shop and walked to her convertible, deep in thought. She had just picked up 2 good leads. Nancy went directly to the Skeets' home on Cottage Street. Although it was not far from the Drews, she had never been in this particular area. The houses were rather shabby, many of them needing paint, but they were neat and the windows glistened. The small lawns in front of them were well kept. Nancy drove slowly until she came to number 22. The bell knob on the Seaman's cottage door was brightly polished. In answer to Nancy's ring, the door was opened by a grizzled, elderly man. Howdy, he said, smiling affably. We don't want to subscribe to any magazines, thank ye. I'm not selling anything, Nancy laughed. I came to see Mrs. Skeets. Well, she hoisted anchor here about an hour ago, he said. I expect she just rode around to the Chandler for some supplies. Most likely she'll be back by 6 bells. Nancy grinned. You mean 11 o'clock, Mr. Skeets? Call me Sailor Joe like the rest of the folks. He grinned broadly. Yes, miss. 6 bells on a ship is 11 o'clock. Then your wife will be back very soon, Nancy said, glancing at her wristwatch. May I wait? Heave your anchor, lass, Joe said. Who talks like that? Come into the parlor. Chuckling, he led Nancy into the living room. It was papered in deep red and furnished in a variety of shabby furniture. On the walls were pictures of ships, a broken but highly polished sextant, a lethal-looking spear, and a large dried starfish. Nancy sat down on a couch and remarked, Sailing all over the world, you must have seen many interesting things, Mr. Skeets. Aye, and so I have. Sailor Joe grinned, setting himself in a captain's chair. Why, a funny thing happened to me one time when I had shore leave in Melbourne, Australia. What? What are the odds? For fun, I told one of the dockhands I was a pearl diver, and me not being able to swim a stroke. That night, after I'd gone to sleep, somebody came and carried me away. Next thing I knew, I'd been shanghaied onto a boat that was really going pearl diving. Sailor Joe laughed uproariously. Nancy wondered what was so funny about this. Instead, it seemed tragic. I see you don't understand the joke, the old salt went on. You see, where I was brought up, us sailors meant washing dishes when we said pearl diving. The old man rocked with laughter and slapped his knees with great calloused hands. Nancy laughed too, but did not want Joe to get started on another one of sea yarns. She was eager to ask him some questions before his wife returned. How long have you lived here? She asked. Maybe a year, maybe 2, Joe said. My old woman moved out here, so I'd be far from the sea and maybe stay home more. But I could smell salt water if I was in the middle of a desert. Speaking of deserts, I must tell you. Nancy interrupted quickly. Did you ever know a young woman by the name of Nancy Drew? Nancy Drew? Well, I'll say I did. And trim little figurehead she was, and as neat as an admiral's cutter. Did you know her? Nancy shook her head. I'm trying to locate a Nancy Smith Drew who's wanted in England, she said. Sailor Joe whistled. Wanted in England, is she? And for what? That girl never did a wrong thing in her life. Oh, she isn't wanted by the authorities, Nancy hastened to say. A relative died and left her some money. Ha! That's a jib of another cut. Joe grinned. Yes, Nancy Smith Drew used to room with my missus in New York. She kept a rooming house then. Well, I'm glad Miss Drew come into... Oh. Well, I'm glad Miss Drew come into some money, for she was hard up, that she was. Studying for the stage, and a fine figure of an actress she'd have made. Tall and beautiful with a fine deep voice. Nancy was excited. Where is Nancy Smith Drew now? Sailor Joe went on. She couldn't get to sign with no theater, and at last she left us to go to some beach with a family as a governess. Nancy was wildly elated at this clue. When was this? She asked. Oh, that was maybe 10... No, not that long. Let me see now. I remember I brought her back a souvenir, and she was gone when I docked. What did I bring her? You'd never guess. A little monkey. I got it from a Portuguese down in Brazil. I'd made a voyage to Rio and... Why, I remember now. It was just 8 years ago next spring that Miss Drew left us. 8 years ago? Nancy's heart sank. Do you remember the name of the family she went with? She asked. Sailor Joe pursed his lips and frowned. Presently he said, English folks, I think. Name of Hilt something? Or was it Washington? You know what? I gave that monkey to a man in exchange for a pair of boots. As the old man burst into laughter again, Nancy felt more encouraged than ever, now that she had found another clue. Her thoughts were interrupted by an exclamation from Joy. Joe! Ahoy! Here comes the missus now. I know her step on the quarter-deck. He jumped to his feet and rushed open the door for Mrs. Skeets. Her arms were loaded with bundles. Brisket corned beef is what you'll get for supper, because it's the cheapest cut in the market, the woman announced. Salt horse again, exclaimed her husband. Well, never mind. We got company. Mrs. Skeets walked into the living room and saw Nancy. Humph! It's you, is it? She sniffed. Without another word, she passed through to the rear of the house, and it was some minutes before the woman returned. Did you bring the money? She asked. Hey, what's all this palaverin' about? Joe demanded in annoyance. This is the young lady who's responsible for the disappearance of the letter from your sister that had $10 in it. I went around to her house. I suppose you got the money with you? Joe looked from his wife to Nancy in bewilderment. But this young lady didn't steal the money, did she? I'm asking no questions, Mrs. Skeet said stiffly. All I want is our $10. Nancy smiled at Sailor Joe. I'm glad you don't think I stole the money, she said. Of course I didn't. A batch of letters was taken from our house, and your wife seems to think that a letter from your sister was among them. Well, I ain't going to let you pay 1 cent, Joe roared. Not even a stevedore would agree to that. Nevertheless, I made a bargain with your wife, Nancy told him. I said I would give her the $10 in exchange for some information about Nancy Smith Drew. You see, Mrs. Skeets said loftily. Well, a bargain's a bargain. Let me see the $10 and then I'll talk. Nancy took the money from her purse and held it up. She told the woman of the conversation that she had had with her husband. I understand that Nancy Smith Drew was engaged as a governess by some English people several years ago. That's right, but Joe told you too much. Of course, this was a long time ago. I don't think it'll do you much good trying to find Nancy Smith Drew there. The name of the people was Wilson, and they was staying at the Breakers Hotel somewhere on Cape Cod. Nancy turned over the $10 bill and started for the door. Thank you both for the information. I shall try hard to find this other Nancy Drew. Mrs. Skeets, ask your husband to tell you about her inheritance. As soon as Nancy reached home, she consulted the long-distance operator in order to dial the Breakers Hotel on Cape Cod. Finally, she was given the number and put in the call. The man who answered said the place was closed for the winter. He was only the caretaker. I'm trying to locate people named Wilson who perhaps spend the summers there, Nancy said. Could you give me their winter address? No, the man replied. I don't know the names of the summer guests, and all the hotel's books are locked up. Maybe if you call next summer, you can find out. Nancy put down the phone and stared into space. Once more, she had run into a stone wall. How could she proceed now? As she sat lost in thought, the phone rang. She picked up the instrument and said hello. Hi, Nancy. Ned! How's everything? Ned Nickerson asked. You mean about the weekend? Just fine. Bess and George and I are driving up on Friday. We'll come right to Omega Chi Epsilon house, okay? That's what I was going to ask you to do. You girls will be staying here. Ned, Nancy said, I'm busy solving 2 new mysteries. She went on to give him a detailed account of Edgar Nixon, the stolen mail, and finally the mysterious letter which had come from England for Nancy Smith Drew. At the end, she laughed and said, Of course I expect your help. It was Ned's turn to chuckle. I might be able to help you sooner than you think. You know there's to be a play Friday night, one of Shakespeare's. The Dramatic Society engaged a coach to come out from New York especially for it. She's a woman, and her name is N. Smith Drew. Okay, end of chapter 6. And we got to end with your favorite character ever. Ned is in a Shakespeare play in the book. There you go! First edition. He is playing offstage voices. I think it's only 100. Oh my gosh. Thank you for the bits, Fee! 96 bits. Thank you. Heave my anchor. I know. Cough. His hands have tattoos in the book. Too shocking. Must delete. Ooh! That's cool! I like that. But that's realistic, though. I mean, people in the military, especially the Navy, right? Well, I don't know that he was in the military, but he was a sailor. I mean, sorry, my nose is like... It started running, I think, because I, like, started laughing in the middle of talking, and I tried not to, and it did, yeah. TMI. That's cool. I wish they kept it, because that's realistic. Like... Thank you for the bits, Lexi. You guys are awesome. For the record, I don't hate Ned.
Open Google Play Store.
But question, did you guys hate Ned before the games, or did the games make you hate Ned? Like, he would be okay if it weren't for the games. Trim little figurehead. I can't even with this guy, I know. Aw, thank you. Thanks for the country voice compliments. Unfortunately, I can do a really good country voice, and then, like, the stereotypical southern accent, I can do a good one of those, too. Hangs up. Claps for chapter 6. All the salt. I wanted to round up to 100. Paige, don't forget to look for someone to raid. Aw, thank you. I've always been a Ned fan. The games made me hate Ned. Yeah, see, I figured. Okay. Let's get on here. Oh. That was an ad. Okay. I was like, wait a second. That is not the music I was listening to. I keep a shrine dedicated to wishing for his death. CJ, that's too much. That is too much. Okay, we are going to raid Jade Silk. She's playing a game that she wants me to play, so I probably won't stay that long for spoilers. But, okay. Dumb question, how do we raid? Also, I need a raid message. I don't know what I should do. Also, I don't know where my sesame emote went. So... okay. Thanks, guys. Wow, I'm not that dark. Thank you, guys. Okay, we're gonna raid Jade Silk. And depending on what's going on, I may be able to stream again on Friday. And I think we'll probably do another read stream. Actually, let me get in my... Let me just pull this up. Okay. So, I'll just try to stream next on Friday, and I will let you guys know times and stuff in the Discord, and hopefully it will give you, I'll give you more advanced notice this time, rather than this morning. So, okay, raid Jade Silk. Okay, crap. Okay, it does say we can raid now. Alright. Let me do a raid, some kind of raid message that you can, copy. I guess you guys don't have access to those, not all of those. And then you can finish your stream. Wait, what? I don't know what emotes to do, you guys. From the rooftop, shout it out, streamer, I'm ready to raid. What? Okay, let's go with that. Let's just copy what Terry said. And that will be our raid. That will be our raid call. So, alright, I will see you guys over there in just a second. And let me finish OBS. Okay, I will see you guys over there. Bye.